Hey everyone, happy Friday! Thanks for coming in for another episode of Fotog Friday. Today we're going to talk about aperture, what that crazy f-stop number is, what it means inside of your camera, and how that number affects exposure in your images. The concept of aperture is a pretty easy one to explain, and once you have a visual for it, it's really easy to understand how it affects your images. But basically, there's like this hole that allows light to come through, and the hole size will get bigger or smaller depending on your aperture setting. For instance, the higher your number is, say f11, f16, f22, you're going to have a very, very tiny hole letting in a very minimal amount of light. But if you have a very low number, it's also called a wide aperture because you have a very wide hole, a very big hole. Here's a demonstration. So we're taking a look inside of my camera, and I'm shining a light inside the lens so you get a really good picture of what goes on inside. I'm taking all of these at a 2-second exposure so that you can really see the hole of the aperture that we were talking about. So this is a hole at f8 at a 2-second exposure. So look what happens inside of the camera. So you see that, a lot of the lens was blocked off, but there was like a pretty significant size hole for light to get through. I'm going to go ahead and start as wide open as possible. So I'm going to go down all the way. This lens goes down to 1.4. So I'm going to take a 2-second exposure there. And so that was completely wide open. Really, really wide. Let's do 2.8. Okay, now we're going to bump up to 5.6. And let's keep going up higher. We'll do f8 again. We'll go up even higher. We'll go up to f11. And finally, f16. I think that's as high as this lens goes. Yep. So now that you've seen what happens inside of the camera when you change your f-stop number, I'm going to show you how changing that number affects your images and affects exposure. I took some pictures of this cute little vase out on my deck to show you how aperture affects exposure. I kept all of my camera settings the same except for the f-stop number. So this particular picture was shot at ISO 500 at 85 millimeters with an aperture of 8.0, so pretty much right in the middle of the scale. And it's at 1/100th of a second. I'm going to start as wide open as possible, which means the number is really low. This is 1.4, and because I kept all of my settings the same and I had originally exposed this picture for f8 with a wide aperture at those same camera settings, you're going to get a really overexposed picture because a lot of light is getting in. As the number goes up, the hole gets smaller, meaning that less light is getting through. So to show you, this is at f2.0. 2.8, f4.0, 5.6, 8, 11, and f16. So as you can see here, as the number gets higher, the exposure lessens because the hole is getting smaller, just like we showed you previously when we looked inside of the lens. Thanks for tuning in today. Next week, we're going to wrap up our discussion on aperture by talking about depth of field. But for today, I hope you have a wonderful Friday and a fantastic weekend.
Don't sweat the technique. Don't sweat